What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at PrizePicks, the exclusive partner of CLNS Media. More from them later. But first, now we get to WEEI. My good friend Jon Lyons is here to break down the latest news in free agency. He is of WEEI Believe Network, and he's a football coach. We already talked about it. Maybe one day I'll get into the coaching field, understand how hard it actually is, because it's easy to sit here from my computer and talk about all this football stuff. But you have fantastic insight, brother. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I'm so excited to be on this program with you because we got some stuff to dive into, but it's always a pleasure just talking football with you as well.
Likewise, my man. So the Patriots haven't made the big signing we're all waiting for, Calvin Ridley. If it happens during the show, we will cover it. They did sign Armon Watts. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not super familiar with Armon Watts. I'll do some research after the show. But in terms of the other moves the Patriots have made, they brought back a ton of their own guys. We know Elliott Wolf said he wanted to prioritize drafting, developing, and retaining their core players. And beyond that, I know Gerard Mayo said that they were going to burn some cash, make a splash, and all those kinds of things. But frankly, they're spending cash on their own guys, which I like. They've also brought in Jacoby Brissett to make sure they've got, more solid presence at quarterback, Antonio Gibson in the backfield, Chuks Okorafor to give them a little better depth at offensive tackle. So what do you think about what they've done so far? Because I know fans are disappointed that they didn't get like a Christian Wilkins or a Danielle Hunter, but they're in the mix for Calvin Ridley. And personally, I feel like they've done a pretty good job so far.
Yeah, look, the biggest thing I'll say to Patriots fans, and as you can see by the picture behind me, myself included, is it's been a couple days. All right. It's only been a couple days. There's plenty of time left. And I think, look, if you look at where the Patriots are, okay, they're not a team coming off an AFC Championship game appearance. They're a team coming off a 4-13 season with a new head coach. And I know he doesn't have the title, but in Elliott Wolf, essentially a new GM. So they're in a spot where re-sign your own guys that are at least the good players, right? Because a 4-13 team there was good players on the 4-13 team. You got to start there and you got to build out for Kendrick Bourne got injured. He was on pace to have the best season of his career. And in 2021, when they actually used him for a full season, he had 800 yards receiving and was really good. So he's a good player. Hunter Henry, good player. Like Anthony Jennings, we talked about him off air, really good against the run. Doesn't put up the gaudy stat numbers that maybe you would jump out at you, but he's a good player. So you got to retain your own good players first. By the way, I sneakily really like Alex Austin, and I'm excited for him this coming year too at corner. I like him a lot. But you got to retain your own good players, and then you got to build from there. And look, we know they have not had a lot of good draft classes over the last 10 years. But in 2020, they had a pretty good draft class. So they re-signed Mike Onwenu, who's a great player, potentially their starting right tackle. They bring back Jennings, who I mentioned. They bring back Josh Uche. They have the tag on Kyle Duggar. So I think one way or another, he'll be back next year. So that's a good start. Now, I like Antonio Gibson, and I like the role Antonio Gibson has because he played receiver in college. He had, I think, a bunch of catches over the last couple of years. He's a guy that James White role that has felt neglected really ever since James White got injured. He can be, look, he's not going to be James White, but he can be good and he can fit that role. So are they a better football team now than they were a month ago? Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And even Jacoby Brissett, I get it. The guy is not a star. He's probably not even a top 15 quarterback, but he's a heck of a lot better than what they had a quarterback last year. Yeah, I think so. And if you look at all the one possession games they lost last year, Taylor, you don't think better quarterback play would have helped them win maybe against Philly, the Colts, the Commanders, right? All these, the Giants, your season's totally different if you just win a handful of those games. You had terrible quarterback play. You had really bad at times receiver play, inconsistent overall, and same with your O-line. You've taken some steps to solidify that. Now, are they all done? No. But as I said, thankfully, we can feel safe. It's only been a couple days. They got some time here.
Yeah, it's 3 days into free agency. You'd swear that we were just a couple weeks from September, but it's understandable. We've been waiting for so long. I do understand what fans are getting a little antsy, but
sure,
give it time. We haven't even hit the draft yet. This team is still going to look very different, even by the time we get to minicamp, than it did in 2023. And as you mentioned, they're not done yet. So shoot off from the hip. What are some moves you'd like to see them make? Who are some players that you might be interested in? And where do you think the holes still lie in this roster?
Well, as long as he hasn't signed anywhere in the last 10 minutes, the guy I would really like is Jonah Williams. And I
Yes, sir.
think the guy, like last year, to me, he had a disappointing season last year at right tackle. But if you go back and look, when he played left tackle in 2021 and 2022, he was really good, especially in 2021. So you look at this offensive line, you could take a Jonah Williams, put him at left tackle, and then all of a sudden, all right, you know who your left tackle is, you know who your center is in David Andrews, you know Cities knows your right guard. Mike Onwenu's your right tackle. And then Cole Strange, I have my own frustrations with some of Cole Strange's inconsistent play, but he's probably, if he's healthy, he's going to be your starting left guard. So you know you have your unit there. And I think, look, Cole Strange needs to be better. City Toe needs to be more consistent. I thought he was really good the end of last year. He needs to be more consistent. But then you feel better about that O-line, a lot better to me than I did week 1 of last year or week 2 of last year. So Jonah Williams is a guy that I look at, and look, I know Calvin Ridley's a big name. I get it. But Jonah Williams is a guy, affordable, still only 26 years old. Like, you could sign that guy. He could be your left tackle for like 6 years if he works out. And that's not just me pulling that out of thin air. Like, he's been a good left tackle in the NFL for Joe Burrow, right?
Yep. The Bengals have had their O-line problems. Jonah Williams last season, again, kind of out of position relative to where he's been, but he was no slouch. He was not one of the turnstiles on that offensive line, so totally agree.
Yeah, so that's really like of the guys I'm looking at, that's another one. DJ Reader, too. I would like him, and I know they just signed Watts. I would like defensive tackle depth next to Christian Barmore because I think Barmore's a stud, but he has had some health issues, and I would like someone along with him that's just going to be at least first and second down run stuffing type guy, preferably an all 3 down guy. So maybe a guy like that, but really the name at the top of my list is Jonah Williams, and then of course Calvin Ridley, and then maybe a guy like a DJ Reader as well.
I completely agree. And then on the wide receiver market, if they don't end up getting a Calvin Ridley, there are some options on the market. We'll get into those. We got a lot of good questions. You guys are going to address that. So let's get into some of those. Let's see what's first. What am I going to pull up? All right. Let's say we miss out on a wide receiver in free agency and trade. So you go for a wide receiver or an offensive tackle in the second round of the draft. What do you think, John?
So this is my philosophy. I think you need to go into the draft already having an answer at either receiver or tackle. And whichever one you don't have an answer for, that's your second round pick at 34 overall. Because I figure you probably take a QB at 3, and I know we'll probably get to that later. But so my earlier point, let's say you sign Jonah Williams. You have Williams and Onwenu, go receiver at 34. Let's say you get Calvin Ridley or you trade for a Brandon Ayuk or whatnot. Okay, then go tackle at 34. But you have to me, you have to have one of those positions with an answer going into the draft. And then that gives you a lot of flexibility with a third round pick at the top of the third round that, maybe you could go with the best defensive player available there. Or maybe even if you have an answer at receiver, you could take another guy you really like. You could go tight end there. Gives you a lot more flexibility. So I look at it as figure out one of those positions now and then go into the draft and take the other one at 34.
I agree. And with tackle, even, you got guys like Javon Foster, Travis Glover, who was really sneaky. For some reason, they didn't acknowledge that he existed at the Senior Bowl, but I really liked what I saw from him, both in individual drills and in teamwork. If you really like Scott Peters, and, I'm not saying he's Dante Scarnecchia or anything, but coming from such a respected tree with Bill Callahan, one of the best offensive line minds in NFL history, that's someone where you say, okay, if we really like his ability to get guys' technique down and bring the physical ability and kind of match the level of play, then if you want, you can even double dip in the second and third round and maybe wait until a little later in the draft. But I completely agree. If you're going into the draft and you don't have that left tackle, that's probably your second round pick. But it's so tough to find those guys outside of the first round where you say, I'm going to let you play in year one and expect you to play at a high level. It's just such a difficult position. But again, I agree. We know they need offensive line help. We know they need wide receiver help. But whatever the priority is, based on whatever they do over the next couple of days or, it could be months. We don't know when the trades are going to happen. It'll be interesting to see then. All right, let's move on. If the Patriots trade away the third pick, do you think they draft a QB in the later rounds or end up looking into Justin Fields? This is always a fun one.
Yeah, look, and I don't mean to just dump on Justin Fields here, but
oh, man. I'm so sorry. We got breaking news.
Nope, go ahead.
Calvin Ridley has officially signed with the Titans. What a bummer. I guess they were the dark horse team.
Yeah, I guess they were the dark horse team, and that's an organization. They let AJ. I don't want to say let AJ Brown go, but they trade AJ Brown. DeAndre Hopkins isn't there anymore. Like That's actually that's a nice fit. I mean, I wonder what their answer at quarterback is, but that's an interesting fit. And in that division too, because that division is in an interesting spot. Because I think going into last year, I looked at Jacksonville as they're the big dogs. They had gone to the divisional round of the playoffs against the Chiefs the year before, and you're like, hey, they're going to be the perennial division champ. Houston was terrific last year. The Colts have Anthony Richardson sitting there, probably, fully healthy going into week 1 this year. So the Titans are in a weird spot. Like, I still look at the Titans, and Derrick Henry's gone now. Like, I look at them as the worst team in that division.
Right. I don't really know what their identity is right now.
Yeah. Like, I don't know.
It's interesting. This is literally, again, this is live. So I'm going to try to get as much info as I can, but see what the money was. $23 million a year for Ridley. I mean, you'd like that kind of money to be something the Patriots were willing to pay, but that probably would have been my ceiling, to be honest. Maybe they didn't want to go past, I guess, a certain price point. The deal is also, so it's 4 years, $92 million, $50 million fully guaranteed. That's just really a shocker. That's one of those that you can't really prepare for. But again, the Titans, I mean, we knew he wanted to stay in Jacksonville. We also don't know if that was just posturing. We have no idea if he was saying, hey, I don't, I'm just doing this. And it made sense because that's where he's from. He's from Florida, got the state income tax and all that stuff, the weather, all the reasons not to come to somewhere like New England. And I don't know what taxes are like in Tennessee. Weather's a little bit better. So those are two advantages they have over New England. But at the same time, I'm curious what the Patriots were offering in terms of money, because we did hear consistently that they were competitive. And now that we do have this news, I guess we'll kind of skip ahead a little bit. Who are some backup plans that you'd like to see at wide receiver? We had Mike Williams released today, and the Chargers even sent out a tweet where they thanked him, which makes it sound like they're probably not going to sign him back. Things could always change, of course, but with that happening, we've heard about Ayuk, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen as potential guys in trade talks. I'm not sure if they're going to move on from Keenan Allen now that they're officially under the cap, but who are some names that kind of stick out to you and options you'd like to see in that?
Yeah. Well, I'll make you smile first and say Brandon Ayuk. I mean, this is a guy with 75 catches last year, and he was the fourth option in their offense. So that's a really, really good player in his prime. Like, that's a guy, to me, I'd give up the 34th overall pick for him. Obviously signed a tackle in free agency, and then boom, you got two guys, assuming, let's just say it's Jonah Williams and Brandon Ayuk. You bring in two guys in their mid-20s, pretty good shape right there. So Ayuk, I like T. Higgins, especially for his size. Another one, and this is my sound a little random, I'd call the Seahawks and ask what they want for DK Metcalf. Like, that's a high money player. They just drafted JSN. And that's a team that has a lot of good young players. I mean, their draft class a couple of years ago was tremendous. Is that a guy that you could get for the 34th overall pick as they keep building that up? Especially, I wonder what Seattle's going to do at quarterback. Geno Smith was really good a couple of years ago. Is he the guy, though, that they look at as we want him for the next 4 or 5 years? Or do they say, hey, we like a Bo Nix to develop behind him, or a Michael Penix to develop behind him, and that's a guy they think they can get at 34, or they take 34, package it, move up somewhere in the first round and get him. So I'd call on DK Metcalf. I like Ayuk. I like Higgins. And I think those three guys, if you just apples to apples, they're equal, if not better players than Calvin Ridley is too.
Absolutely.
So you're bringing in guys, it's backup plans, but you're bringing in guys that are equivalent to better skill level. It just might cost you a draft pick. Now, as far as on the market, I like Mike Williams, don't love him. Michael Thomas is going to be available, but he's had a lot of trouble staying on the field the past few years. Hunter Renfrow is a different position. So I like, again, like the player, but you have Demario Douglas, you have Kendrick Bourne. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, look, they got to make an addition there. And I think now maybe this brings into focus, you sign a Tyron Smith, maybe you sign a Jonah Williams, and that 34th pick is now maybe turned into one of those, better receivers available.
I agree. Because if you're going to give up capital, you want it to be for a young player. You got T. Higgins, Ayuk, and DK Metcalf. Those guys are 25, 26. So if you're going to give something up, it's all right, it's kind of like the Brandon Cook situation where you know what you're going to get. You know what these guys, they put it on tape. You have a little bit of security in that regard. I think T. Higgins, I don't know if I'd want to give up a second. Ayuk and Metcalf, I'm I'll give up a second. Yeah. T. Higgins, the only thing that scares me is the injury history. because he has been banged up.
Yeah.
You also haven't seen him as a true one. I don't think he can't be that. But again, if you're talking about like I'm giving up a second, I want to know exactly what I'm getting for this guy. And it feels like Ayuk and Metcalf are more consistent guys where, you plug them in. You don't really have to worry about the health necessarily right now. So from your perspective, what would you consider giving up for each of those guys? What do you think would be fair compensation?
So I'd be so look for Ayuk and for Metcalf, the 34th pick, no brainer. Higgins, look, I agree with you in large part with the health thing. I'd prefer to give up a 3rd round pick, but if the Bengals really were like, hey, it's a 2nd round pick or nothing, then I'd be open to it. And also like another like could the Patriots trade down in the 2nd round and use that pick to then get T. Higgins? So they pick up some capital and they're not giving the 34th pick. But honestly, I'd be open to it at 34. And I still think like they re-signed Bourne, they have Douglas. Like I think they're going to bring in another free agent that, I don't know if Mike Williams specifically is the guy, but maybe a guy that 3 weeks ago we weren't really thinking of as, oh, that's a guy they'll bring in. I feel like they're going to bring in a guy like that. But again, it feels like the trade market is now the best way to go if they're going to upgrade at receiver, because they've solidified tight end. They're okay at running back, but receiver is still this major issue that it was a month ago. So I feel like the trade market. So yeah, I'd give up a 2nd round pick for those 2 guys. I'd be open to it for Higgins, but I'd rather give up a 3rd.
And like you mentioned, there could be someone we're not talking about. And when you look at the roster, if they had Calvin Ridley, we know he's more of a Z. But if Kendrick Bourne, also more of a Z. If you had to figure out a way to make that work, whether it's more condensed formations where they don't really have to be outside, where the route tree is smaller and they have less space to work, all right, you bring them in closer. Maybe you kind of switch them up based on the situation where you have a guy who's number 1 in the progression and he's the Z, and then the X is more like a clear out guy or something like that. And like I feel like a guy like DJ Chark might fit in that mix. But if they end up going with a veteran X, where someone where it's like, all right, again, we know we're going to get out of him. He may not be a highly productive guy. He may not be a deep threat or someone who scares the defense, but at least we've got a core of veterans. And then you pivot to the draft and say, kind of like a Malcolm Mitchell, where no, we're not relying on you to be the guy, but if you produce, then yeah, we'll get you some touches and make sure that we find ways to utilize you. Who are the receivers in the 2nd, maybe even the 3rd round, who you look at and you say, as an X type, I think you could slide this person in and have them kind of rotate with the veteran and give a more explosive presence. Because for me, it's Xavier Legette all the way, baby. I am full steam ahead on Legette. I love the way he talks. He sounds amazing. He's got a guy like Matthew Slater, where he's got that deep voice, kind of lulls you to sleep a little bit, and then he just still physical and he'll blow right by you. And he was a team captain. I know he spoke to the Patriots at the Combine. They were there for his pro day, the wide receiver coaches. I don't know if it was Tyquan Underwood or both coaches, but if it was Mike Hughes as well, I'm not sure. But yeah, if you're looking towards the draft for that explosive big play threat to complement like a Pop Douglas, who would that be for you?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Legette, because I feel like he's a guy that I don't want to say not a lot of people are talking to, but he's really just helped his stock like week after week after week. So like that's a guy I look at 34. Like, and that's the thing. If you're drafting a receiver at 34, I don't want to say it has to be an X type guy, but you feel okay in the slot with Demario Douglas. You mentioned they already have Kendrick Bourne. Like, I don't want them to pigeonhole themselves there either. So like, yeah, Legette's a guy that I like, but I don't know if, like, again, I'm open to it, but then it's also like, that's a weird spot too, that like, if they really like the tight end from Texas, it's Jatavian Sanders, right?
Yeah.
Like if they look at like, hey, we're going to do what we did with Gronkowski and Hernandez and go 12 personnel all the time, Hunter Henry and him, and mix in Austin Hooper. That's another way, because you mentioned they don't have that traditional split out X. Like that's another way they could get creative and do that. Like that's a guy that I don't know if I like him quite at 34, but like I like the player because he's so big and he just moves well. So that like I'd be open to it, like going down that route or Legette, but it's tough because I don't want them to pigeonhole themselves. But I think you make a good point that if you don't trade for like one of these guys, you might have to go X in that spot at 34.
Yeah, and again, you don't necessarily have to get through the draft in X. Like everybody wants one, but they don't come very often. Usually you're probably going to get a guy who's a really good Z who can maybe move around if you like the look or you like the matchup. Like you think about a Ricky Pearsall, a Ladd McConkey. And that's one thing I understand Patriots fans are not going to be very happy.
By the way, sorry to cut you off. Some of Ricky Pearsall's highlight, like that dude is nuts.
He's a
Some of those catch, I'm like, that guy could play with one hand. I think he'd be okay.
And he's tough too, man. It's like he's a football player and he's a really good athlete where, again, you can put him all over the formation based on whether you like the look, what the play is, different things like that. So, again, I want to make sure Patriots fans realize losing out on Calvin Ridley is not the end-all be-all. Is it very disappointing? Yes. I still think they need to add a veteran pass catcher. But at the same time, there is such great talent in this draft. Even look at, how often we see third-round picks excel for teams, third or fourth round picks like Jerron Reed for the Packers. Obviously, Tank Dell is like the poster child for that right now. So while I understand it's going to be hard to find that explosive veteran, it's just those guys don't really shake loose very often. And, when they do, sometimes, as we've seen, it's hard to acquire them. But I do want to remind everybody, this draft is a very good draft to need some explosiveness and weaponize your offense at receiver. Or a receiver, again, if we talk about a Jatavian Sanders, they're probably not going to be in the market for a Brock Bowers, but you still have those kind of options in the draft.
Yeah, one name that really interests me too, and I just don't know if he'll get to 34, is Brian Thomas Jr. Because everyone looks at Malik Neighbors, and look, Malik Neighbors is freaking awesome. That's the guy. But Brian Thomas, big-bodied, physical, he's one of those guys, and you know this, he just looks a little bit different out there, and you're like, okay, that, and my only concern with him is does he get picked at 21st or 22nd? Is he gone but that's a guy to me, if he's there at 34, I'll walk the draft card up there for him. I really like that player a lot. And I think he would fit kind of that mold of what you're talking about. But I think to your larger point that you just made, there's going to be guys there, and there could be guys in the third round as well. And that's why I think it's so important. Go into the draft knowing, hey, do we need a tackle here or do we need a receiver here? And then there's going to be options in both.
And also, I've talked about Xavier Legette as kind of that maybe X option. You also throw Brendan Rice into that mix. I think he is an X, but he's someone who has positional versatility. And we know with, Elliott Wolf and his more Packers-esque philosophy, even the Browns-esque philosophy, they like size. Maybe in the slot, they'll concede a little bit, and obviously they'll probably have to with Pop Douglas. But those big body receivers who can move all over the formation, you can use them in different ways. Legette and Brendan Rice can be used as a big slot. You can use them at Z and give them advantageous splits or use them in motion, things like that. Or you can put them in those one-on-ones and see what you get there. I'm going to go through the chat. This basically is going to turn into a live mailbag. We can't not address. I know the chat's blowing up right now. We're going to throw it over to our friends at PrizePicks, get our bearings a little bit, and then I'm going to look at some questions. Fire off in the chat if you want to ask us anything. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. Be right back. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. Want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like Meek Mill and Sugar Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. With Jason Tatum going for the MVP, I'm taking more on his points and rebounds. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, so we talked about Brandon Ayuk. I'm seeing some people in the chat bring up the possibility of a Deebo Samuel. Now, what would you feel about that? Personally, I see Deebo as an outstanding football player, but as a wide receiver, it kind of worries me, especially with the injury history. Like we saw in the Super Bowl, Brandon Ayuk was the only one on that 49ers team who was uncovering against man coverage. Man has been the Patriots' kryptonite. Now, part of that is because they had Mac Jones, where you can play man coverage. You don't have to worry about him with his legs. Now, if they get somebody like a Drake May or Jaden Daniels, that's very different. Teams may not want to play man quite as much because they're good enough athletes where they can get chunk plays when the defense's back is to them. But still, Deebo is still an outstanding player. He's an elite playmaker. So how would you feel about maybe him for a third-round pick if the 49ers would even entertain that?
Oh, I'd pick him up at the airport. I mean, Deebo's one of my favorite players in the NFL, but I do think your point about the health is if he comes here, I don't want him really playing any running back. Like maybe in certain special situations, because you look at that 49ers offense, you have multiple really good offensive linemen, and I know they had some inconsistency this year, but multiple good offensive linemen. You have Christian freaking McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. Like, they missed on the quarterback at 3rd overall in Trey Lance and still found a guy to get him to the Super Bowl. Like, that's how good that offense is. You got the best play caller in the NFL, or at least top 3, depending on how you like Kyle Shanahan. So there's a lot they do there. Whereas if he came to the Patriots, he would be the guy. And because of that, I would want him. Hey, you're playing receiver. We'll put you in at running back, maybe the occasional goal line, short yardage, funky play situation. Sure. But your primary position is wide receiver. And then again, you have Ramondre Stevenson, already a good running back. You put a guy like Deebo at receiver. Then all of a sudden you might have something there. Like if you have Deebo, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, like you might be on this. Like it still feels like you could use a little bit more at tight end, and nothing against Hunter Henry, but I want another more athletic piece there.
Explosiveness there. Yeah, for sure.
And I like Austin Hooper, but I don't look at him as like, oh, he's an explosive guy. So like, I would like a little bit more there, but again, you add Deebo to that mix. Like I would take Deebo over Ayuk personally, just because I think physically he's tougher, he's stronger. But Ayuk, you make the good point about man coverage, and part of that is he's strong too, but he's also really shifty in some of those routes. But I think also if Deebo's not playing running back, maybe he's fresher in week 17, week 18 in the playoffs eventually. But yeah, if you can tell me that a 3rd round pick would get you one of those guys, I am all for that. I honestly think it would take a 2nd round pick to get those guys.
I completely agree. We're going to pivot really quickly from wide receiver because EJ Jimenez, really appreciate the donation. Thank you so much. All right. Ideal day 2 rookie right tackles. Now, personally, I think Nwenu, I know Van Pelt is scheme flexible. I totally understand that. If he wants Nwenu to play guard, he'll find a way to make that work. But I do think he's a better fit at tackle for them. One, because from what we've seen from the Browns tape last year, their guards are the ones who are usually doing all the pulling and being asked to do all the athletic stuff like that, which also creates some confusion for the defense because they play off of that with their play action scheme. Now, that said, okay, let's just say that they bump Nwenu back to right guard. You got Cole Strange or maybe even City So at left tackle for you. Who do you like at right tackle on day 2?
So forgive me if it's day 2 or day 3. Sorry.
Day two.
Sorry, because I was looking at day 3, guys, actually. So sorry to Satoa Lumea, who I think I just pronounced that name wrong. But for day 2, like I like Tyler Guyton at Oklahoma a lot, and that's a system. And I know
which was pro day.
Yeah, and what'd you think?
I really like. So I thought at the Senior Bowl it was up and down, but you see the talent. Like that's very obvious. And they're probably gonna have to take him with the 34th pick. But if they really like him and they want him to play sooner or later, I absolutely like him as a prospect for that category.
Yeah, and I think the question to answer, and again, that he would be my guy there on day 2. And then if I pronounce this wrong, Fatanu from Washington, like if he's there on day 2, like I like him a lot as well. But I think the question the Patriots really have to answer there is what do they think of City So? Because if you like City So, like to me, Onwenu should be your right tackle. I'm with you. But if you don't like City So, then maybe you got to move Onwenu over, or maybe you got to draft another guard. Maybe it's someone else. But if you like City So, then you're looking at, okay, we have the right side of our line all set. And another sneaky need here is center. And I love David Andrews. Is he going to play another year? Is he going to play another 2 years, 3? Like you need to have a plan there. And who knows? Maybe that could be, City So's played all over the offensive line. Maybe they want to groom him for that. I don't know. But I think that's a guy you want to pay attention to because, again, feels like Cole Strange is going to play on the left side. David Andrews is your center. If you like City So, then I think you can sign a left tackle and then take another tackle to develop. But if you don't like City So, then it kind of changes maybe what you want to invest.
I agree. All right. So this is a good question. Who's actually left at wide receiver? So I'm going to split my screen right here. I'm doing this live, so I'm sorry if it's clunky. Oh, no, actually, we're pretty well. All right, here we go. So let's look at PFF. They do such a great job with this and try to get an idea of who is even left on the market. I will note that Jacini Anderson actually tweeted that the Patriots are pivoting to the draft to address wide receiver. Yeah. So if they sign any of these guys, I mean, one, there's not a lot of, big name options left, to be quite frank. That would probably happen through trade. So at the top of that list, what do you think of Marquise Brown?
So I like him. I don't love him. I think that's a guy to me that if you sign Marquise Brown, you feel good, but you feel like you need something else too. Right. And he's a good play, ton of speed there. But again, I mean, the Ravens drafted him to be Zay Flowers, and they ended up having to take Zay Flowers a few years later. So like that's the issue with me. And again, I like the player, don't really love the player.
I agree. All right, Calvin Ridley, RIP to those dreams. Those spun while it lasted. Darnell Mooney's with the Falcons, Gabe Davis with the Jags. Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyler Boyd, a couple veterans. Now, I mean, I don't love the fit because, again, Odell Beckham Jr., that feels like it's stepping on the toes of the Kendrick Bourne. Tyler Boyd, maybe as a rotational slot guy with Demario Douglas, because Demario does have, the concussion history just from his rookie season. He is an undersized guy, so I feel like this season you're not going to see him go over the middle a ton unless it's maybe deeper downfield where he can get over to the linebackers. But Tyler Boyd could maybe give you that guy where you know exactly what you're getting out of him. Uber consistent, great locker room guy, and again, can take more of those big hits because he's a big body. How would you feel about him? Or OBJ?
Yeah, I'm out on OBJ. I mean, the previous injury concerns, and I just think the explosiveness is not what it was. Boyd, I'm intrigued by, but my concern about Boyd is he's playing in an offense with Higgins, as we mentioned, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow. So, like, how good is this guy really? Like, I think he's a pretty good player, but is he a guy to really invest in, or is he a guy that is no different than Kendrick Bourne? Like, that's my issue with Tyler Boyd.
I completely agree. All right, Curtis Samuel. If there's anybody on the market who intrigues me with any significance, it's Curtis Samuel. But again, he's not really an X. He's more of that Z. And I hate putting guys in a box because I understand that if Van Pelt gets talent, he'll figure out how to use it. That won't be a problem. We already talked about with Calvin Ridley. He was going to figure it out. But Curtis Samuel, reliable pass catcher, got some explosiveness, not great explosiveness, but, he can threaten some down the field, and he's a good route runner, although for him, injuries have been a pretty significant concern. What do you think about Curtis Samuel?
Yeah, I wanted them to sign him a few years ago when he was available. I've been a big fan of this player for a long time. And I think, look, you in Washington, like we talked here about the issues with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, like, I mean, he had Sam Howell throwing to him for most of the year this year. So I think he's a good player at 27 and a half years old, too. He's got that explosiveness. Now, you're right. Is he that guy you're going to line up out at X and say, hey, just beat a corner on the outside? And maybe not all the time, but that's where formationally, scheme-wise, I think you could, like, if you had a package with him and Bourne and Demario Douglas, like, you could find a way to work that and get a couple guys open, I feel like. So, yeah, I would sign Curtis Samuel. I like him.
Especially for under $10 million. That's a pretty good deal. And injuries and everything with that kind of money, it's fine. We talked about DJ Chark. Now, again, this is a guy who's more of an X. He's not really a downfield threat with any consistency at this point in his career, but he gives you a guy. He's not really that old, 27, so he'll probably be almost 28 by the time the season really gets underway or towards the end of the season. Not that bad. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I know we talked about him earlier. I'm not anti-Chark. I'm just, I don't. Like, to me, the description, and you can, folks watching, you can read the PFF description there. Like, if you put Devontae Parker's name at the top of that, I wouldn't see much of a difference.
Like, the exact same thing.
Like that's my issue. That, like, I don't think I'm not. Yeah, I'm out on. Like, if they sign him for something low, fine. But other than that, not the answer.
Yeah, we touched on Michael Thomas, Josh. Now we're starting to get to the point where it's like these would be depth guys. They're not really making a huge impact for you. But what do you think about Josh Reynolds type?
So if you're playing against the Rams every week, I love the guy. I mean, he was awesome in that playoff game, right, against them. Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. This is a guy that comes in like he's Kendrick Bourne's backup, and then, hey, you feel good as he's Kendrick Bourne's backup. But if you're in 11 personnel and he's one of the 3 starters, and the other guys are Bourne and Douglas, I don't think you feel that great.
I completely agree. Yeah, just looking real quick, Noah Brown would have been a guy I really liked. I was interested in him, but he's back. He's with the Texans again. Yeah, he's back with the Texans. Yeah, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. The Patriots did have interest in him.
Too many drops for me, especially in big situations.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it feels like another Juju, and like not the same as Juju, because a lot of what happened with Juju was the injury. But it's one of those where it's like, oh, it worked for the Super Bowl champions. And it's like, yeah, but there is definitely a Patrick Mahomes effect to that a little bit. And then, we're getting pretty dark.
I mean, like, you get beyond these names. I'm like, okay, that's the 34th overall pick. Like, you know what I mean? Just go there. Yeah.
It's getting pretty rough there. All right, let's see if there's anything else in the chat. We're probably going to wrap this up pretty soon, just because this really turned into the how do we move on from Calvin Ridley show. Also, let me get that back. There we go. All right, I wanted to see a little bit more. Sorry, bud. Let's see what else we got here in the chat, or I'll look through some of the questions that were asked previously, see if anything is relevant here. Let's see. Beauty of live television. I think we kind of covered the draft. Okay, let's end on this one. We'll on to something a little fun. Because a lot of these are pretty much things that we've kind of touched on. Actually, here's one. What's your feeling about the defensive players the Patriots are going after? Because it feels like the defense, the priority is even greater if you don't have that like wide receiver one type. And like you mentioned, I tweeted about it earlier today. The Patriots as a team were not as bad as they seemed. A lot of it had to do with the fact that they had quarterbacks who were consistently turning the ball over, missing opportunities, and obviously the offensive line was a mess, where even when the quarterback play was halfway decent, like frankly, when I looked at the tape last season, I was saying a great wide receiver one like a T. Higgins would make everybody's job easier because he uncovers faster and you don't have to have as many plays to get down the field. But you know what else really helps your offense? When the offensive line can run block and when they can pass protect. And you don't need to get the ball out in under 2.4 seconds all the time. But, that's where I'm at. We already talked about the offensive line. We'd like to see a Jonah Williams to kind of get some reinforcements there. One thing I will actually mention before we actually get to the defense was City So. I spoke to him when everybody was clearing out their lockers on the last day of media availability. He touched on the fact that he felt like he was behind the 8 ball because he spent all of the summer at tackle. Which even, anybody who was watching was like, this guy should not be playing tackle. I get that's what your plan was. It's not a good fit for him, at least not in his rookie year at this level. So I do have a lot more confidence in him because he understands where he went wrong was mostly technique. With Scott Peters, I feel like that's going to be a lot better in year 2. So hoping the offensive line is better. That'll go a long way if you don't have an elite cast of wide receivers. But defensively, who do you think would be a good ad based on who's still available on the market?
So is this the point where I say the best person on defense available is Bill Belichick? Is that when I say it, or should I save that?
You certainly can.
Should I save that? No, I'm teasing. Yeah, it's interesting because I've said this and I've felt this way for a while. They have a playoff level defense. I mean, this has been one of the best defenses in the league since 2019. And here's the thing. They were 15th in the league in points per game last year, which I know sounds average. Their offense allowed 38 points on pick sixes and fumble recoveries and safeties. If you take those 38 points off, they were 8th in points allowed, like in the league. Like it is a really, really good defense. So for me, like defensive, like I don't want to say like I don't want them to go after anybody. What I want them to do is I wanted them to re-sign Anthony Jennings, and they did. I want them to have an extension for Christian Barmore, and largely that's kind of and I have Duggar back. That's largely what I want. That like I really wanted them to go after Antoine Winfield because I thought that kind of free safety, he would have been awesome at that. He stayed in Tampa, so I'm not like there's no defensive player to me like Christian Wilkins signed to like that's a guy I would have really liked here, but that was huge money as well. So to be honest,
it's like I get it, I understand.
Yeah. So to me, there's not really any defense. Like my priority right now defensively is re-signing Barmore. Like there's nobody on the market that I'm like, oh, you got to go get that guy. Once Winfield and Wilkins are off the board, that was kind of because even like L'Jarius Sneed, love the player. Do I want to give up a pick and an extension when I have Christian Gonzalez, Jonathan Jones, and Marcus Jones? And then I have Jabril Peppers, who was one of the best safeties in the league last year. And you have Doug. Like, I don't know if and again, love the player, but I don't know if I want to give up that cost when I'm already pretty good in the secondary.
And you mentioned Jabril Peppers. Like, let's think about Jalen Mills. He wanted to leave because he said they got 2 good safeties in Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar. I want to start somewhere. I've seen a lot of people mention Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons is not coming to New England. He's not coming.
Where's he going to play? Like Adrian Phillips is another example. Like Adrian Phillips didn't play. Like
right. And then I think the third safety is going to continue to be Marte Mapu. I know people really want to see him at linebacker. I don't see that happening for a few reasons. One, Juwan Bentley is the only every down linebacker on this team. Jelani Tavai could, but they don't really use him that way. I think Marte Mapu will be used at linebacker. He was last season because in their big nickel packages, that's where you see not as much Peppers last year, but Duggar and Mapu would occasionally either be in the slot or they'd be in the box as that kind of pseudo linebacker type. And then you also saw later in the season, Marte Mapu did get some opportunities in that Mac Wilson type role to play coverage linebacker. So I think that's what suits his skill set. Like you don't want the guy putting on 15 pounds and losing his explosiveness. Like he's a playmaker. He can be a ball hawk. We saw it when he baited Patrick Mahomes into an interception. Like you want him to still have that level of range. And if you have a guy who can play linebacker and have the range of a good safety, like once the game slows down for him, he's going to be really good. So again, he's their third safety. Justin Simmons, I don't think there's any shot. But thank you also, Nelson Lloyd, so much for the donation. We appreciate it. What about Chase Young? I'm hard pass personally.
Yeah, there was some things I saw effort-wise in that playoff run that
Yep.
I'm like, that was a guy who had been traded. You're on the best team in the NFL in the 49ers. You're fighting to win a Super Bowl, but you're gonna be a free agent. And I saw him not pursuing some run plays. I saw some pass rushes that he just kind of stopped.
Right.
Like, that's a guy I don't want that guy here. Like, yeah, he's talented, I get it, and I don't think he would be very expensive, I get it, but just based and I know it was only, a 3 or 4 game sample size at the end of the year and into the playoffs, but some of those things I saw, especially in high leverage games, I'd take a pass.
I agree. And I actually have the mock draft database big board for the wide receivers. If you want to go through that, see who could
Yeah,
be.
hell yeah, man.
All right, so let me get this off real quick. Thank you again, Nelson. All right, sharing my screen again. Let's see what we got. So let's talk about the scenario I think is going to end up like being a subject of discussion at some point. Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah.
Now, if it's Drake May at number 3, I don't want anybody else. I'm sprinting up and handing in that card. If it's Jaden Daniels, as much as I like him and I would be completely okay with the Patriots taking him and building around him, that's fine. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is a guaranteed home run. Now, Drake May is not a guaranteed home run, but I think his upside is high enough that you're like, yeah, I'll gamble on his talent. He could be like a top 10-ish quarterback in the NFL. But again, Harrison Jr. is automatic. So is he someone that you're even considering with the 3rd overall pick, or do you think this team has too many needs to go for a wide receiver?
Yeah, look, I would consider it, but to be honest with you, if I don't want to go quarterback there, I want to trade down. Because to me, the biggest question the Patriots need to answer, and you kind of just brought it up, what do they think of Jaden Daniels? Because there's a lot to love about Jaden Daniels. Does move his feet in the pocket a little bit too much for my taste. He's got some issues, but
bouncy, yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot to love about him. Guy won the Heisman, right? 4,000 yards, all that. If they like Jaden Daniels, sit there at 3 and take either him or May, whoever's available. But if they don't like Jaden Daniels, to me, that's the question. Could change the entire first round of the draft, because if they don't like Jaden Daniels, well, if May goes 2, then okay, yeah, you could take Harrison Jr., you could take Joe Alt, or all of a sudden now you could trade down. Like, you could trade down to 6th or 7th overall, and you could still get a Neighbors and a Dunze. Like, you could still get some of these
number
guys.
ones. Yep.
Yeah. Like, or you could trade down to, just say Atlanta at 8 overall, and like you could still get Olu Fashanu and have a really good tackle for years to come. So that to me is the biggest question the Patriots need to answer. And they may already know, but the biggest question they need to answer, what do they think of Jaden Daniels? Because if he's the guy, take him there, no brainer. Or of course, Drake May if he's there. But if they don't like him, then I think you start to trade down. So I love Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he's a terrific player. But I think if you're going to take a receiver in the top 5, you should already have your answer at quarterback and offensive line. And I know a lot of people point to Jamar Chase. They already had Joe Burrow when they took him. Even Calvin Johnson. And I know they never really were that great. They already had Matthew Stafford at that point. So it's like, if you're going to take that guy top 5, then I think you got to have, and it's like, we look at the Atlanta Falcons right now. They took Kyle Pitts at 4 overall. I wonder if they could go back. They'd say trade down or take a quarterback there instead. And now they wouldn't be paying Kirk Cousins, $180 million. As much as I like Kyle Pitts, like, I think that's something that you got to be like, as much as I like receiver, I think that's a position. And I would put linebacker and safety in this category too, interior offensive lineman. Like, I don't want to take those guys high until I have some of the other positions already answered.
I completely agree. I do like the idea of taking the Washington boys. An Adunze, Michael Penix reunion. I would
Jalen
not.
Polk. I like Jalen Polk, by the way. He's like, he gets overshadowed. That dude's a really, really good player. Like,
I feel like there's just so much explosiveness in this class. It's like either you're explosive or you're huge, like a Keon Coleman, where like, yeah, he's not the fastest, but he's got a crazy catch radius and he's massive. I think that's why Jalen Polk gets overlooked a lot. But again, like you said, he's still a very good player. I got to figure out how to get this banner off. Okay, there it is. Because I was talking about defense there. But in this like first round range, so from this projection, it's probably going to be ending at about the Xavier Worthy level.
Yeah.
Who are some other guys that you're interested in? For me, like we talked about Brian Thomas Jr., the Texas guys, I think Xavier Worthy is not just a great athlete. I think he's a great football player. The route running is spectacular. Like, he really understands how to play the position, but the size scares the dickens out of me. really makes me nervous. A.D. Mitchell is someone I like a lot more if the Patriots are like, hey, maybe I want to trade back into the first towards the tail end for a wide receiver. What do you think about the two Texas guys?
Yeah, so I like Mitchell better, and a lot of it has to do with the size, and I think the physicality there is there a little bit more. And the other thing, like you mentioned Worthy's route running, and you're 100% right. I wonder in AVP's offense, because in the old Patriots offense, running arguably was the most important asset because it was all timing and spacing, and you had to be in the right spot. It's not that it's not important in AVP's offense, but I think you can get away with a guy that needs some more refinement. Whereas in the old system, at the Patriots, like Malcolm Mitchell was a pretty good route runner when he started playing as a rookie. Like he already could do some of those things. Whereas now maybe you can get away with, hey, this guy can play. It's going to take him a year or two to refine that route running, but he can play right away because our offense isn't quite as rigid on some of those and some of those reads. So that's why I like Mitchell better. I mean, Worthy, good player, but I like Mitchell a little bit better.
I completely agree. All right, let's move on to this next tier of receivers. We've got Keon Coleman, the big guy, crazy catch radius. People say he's slow and they like to compare him to N'Keal Harry. I don't think he's N'Keal Harry. One, I think he's much better after the catch. If N'Keal Harry was as good after the catch in college as he was in the NFL with that jump ball ability, he would still be in the NFL because that's pretty much Debo. It's like if you can win deep and win underneath, the people will find a role for you. So I think Keon Coleman is in a totally different category. Ladd McConkey is like, he's so good. He's just really good. He blew away the Senior Bowl. One of those guys like a Puka kind of, where obviously he tested better athletically, but in terms of the Senior Bowl, like nobody could cover him. And you can just see this guy's going to have success in the NFL very early on. Troy Franklin is kind of in that Xavier Worthy category for me. Where I'm like,
yeah, the only like, and it's funny, and I'm sorry to cut you off. Like he's just like he's so thin when I watch him, and I hate to say this, but like I look at and I'm like Tyquan Thornton. Because it's
better after the catch, though, I think, than Tyquan. I think he's actually got some wiggle and can get away with more stuff versus having to be in a straight line. But I see what you're talking
about. That's it, like, and that's fair. And like, because my concern about Tyquan Thornton when they drafted him is like, this dude gets widened on routes and pushed into the sideline sometimes because he's just not strong enough when he was at Baylor. Like, and Franklin, that doesn't happen as much for him now at Oregon, but like, I could see that maybe being an issue in the NFL. But you're right. In fairness, he is better after the catch for sure.
Yep. And then we've already sung Xavier Leggett's praises. Like if he's there in the second round, like you take him. I don't care about a trade back. Like he's a really good prospect. And again, they talk so much about like people. Like we want people who are going to fit. And again, he was a team captain. He's overcome a ton of adversity. Brett Coleman touched on it on Twitter. Just a really high character guy who's also super talented. He gets some knocks for his route running. I think he's fine as a route runner. Like, is he going to be Julian Edelman? No. He's closer to a DK Metcalf where you only want him running maybe a handful of routes, but he runs them well. He snaps off routes very well, especially for a big guy. He doesn't let you keep your hands on him. And he's explosive after the catch, and he's a deep threat. So if you have anything else to add to Leggett, feel free. But because I could talk about him the entire show, I gotta keep myself contained.
No, I hear you. And the name right above him, Roman Wilson, is one that intrigues me too, because and it's kind of the same thing that is said about JJ McCarthy. Like that Michigan offense is so predicated on they're gonna run the ball, they're gonna go play action and short passes and downhill. So I don't think we got to see the full complement of what Roman Wilson can be when he was in Michigan. Like,
he even said that. I think he was like, I probably should have gone somewhere else because I didn't get to actually play receiver very much.
So that's a guy like, and that's the thing about Roman Wilson. Like, I like the player. I wouldn't take him at 34 because I don't know if we've seen everything. Now, that's my third round pick. Okay, I'm in for that. I don't know if we've seen the full guy there yet, and that's what for him.
I agree. Ricky Pearsall is the only other guy in this group where I'm like, hell yeah, second round. I might want to trade back because I feel like you can get him in the early middle rounds. I don't think you have to go all the way at 34, but he's such a good football player. If they're like, we want him on our team, like, I'm not going to be mad at him.
And he's a guy, too, that I think with the quarterback situation this past year at Florida and kind of where they were at, similar to Roman Wilson, I don't think we saw even the full potential of what he can be. Because, again, I mentioned earlier, that highlight tape, he's doing all these crazy things that jumps off at you. But you're right. He's just a flat out good football player. Like you want, sometimes you just got to look and say, like, this dude's just a flat out good football player and take him. And I think we haven't seen the full potential there, but there's a lot to like there.
And Ricky Pearsall kind of reminds me of like a Jalen Polk, where you would look at it and maybe not think, he's just, again, football player. He's not physically going to wow you, but I still think that Pearsall can give you more vertically than a Jalen Polk. Like, that's why I think he's going to be one of those guys that's firmly in the second round. because you're still going to get some explosiveness. And unlike he's kind of like with Ricky, because he not only was he not utilized, but with Roman Wilson, like JJ McCarthy was still a solid quarterback. Like Roman Wilson wasn't having to make crazy adjustments and, didn't really get to show that. Pearsall did, because he was having to make some just wild catches just to get that ball in there. And you got to see, okay, if Drake May does struggle with his accuracy early on while the footwork is still getting worked on, we know this is a guy who's an accuracy eraser. So again, Leggett and Ricky Pearsall, those are two of my guys. I love them. Now let's get into the kind of next tier receivers. We're talking more third round. Malachi Corley, the Yak King, I think is his handle on Twitter. Jalen Pope we talked about. Tez Walker, don't love him. Senior Bowl scared me off. Unless you get him in like the 5th round, I don't really want to invest in it. Jermaine Burton has some character concerns, and especially with the Crafts, considering I think he assaulted a female fan after a game or something like that. The Crafts aren't going to let that fly. I don't even think he's going to be on the board. But Brendan Rice, we talked about, who's an X, got some positional versatility, really tough in his routes. I loved it the Senior Bowl. The first day I keep mentioning this, but it's just funny to me because I kept seeing people tweet saying, oh, Brendan Rice isn't getting open, or like, he's wearing coverage. I'm like, no, the coverage is wearing him. These guys are grabbing him. They're all over him, but he was still physical, fought through contact, and made catches. I love to see that, especially from your kind of big wide receivers. Then we got Jalen McMillan, Johnny Wilson. I haven't watched a ton of McMillan, to be honest, but I know he's more of an explosive guy. Is he more of like slight frame? Have you watched him?
A little bit. I think, he's not like, he doesn't jump out at you like the other Washington receivers do, but he's one of those, like, and you'll probably notice this, like he kind of finds a way to be in the right spot, which I think is valuable. Like, but I look at him like this list I'm looking at, like Brendan Rice is the guy I probably like the best, like of this. And it's funny, when I first watched him, when I watched a little bit of USC, it's like, I was like, is this guy a slot that they're playing a little bit outside? Like, what is it? Because you made the point, like he can do both of those things pretty well. And I like that versatility at that point. Like, again, he's the one guy on this list because, again, Walker has the consistency concerns. Burton has the off the field concerns. So Rice is the guy, like, if this is their 4th round pick, that like top of the 4th round, like I like that a lot.
Do you think 3rd round is too rich for Rice?
Here's my issue with the 3rd round. And I would say that about the several guys above him as well. I just think there's going to be some better options at the end of that 2nd round, early 3rd round, whether it's at receiver or at tight end, if they want to do a lot of 12 personnel like that's, and I think you had the stat when they hired AVP that the Browns did 11 personnel, like the 3rd most in the NFL or something last year. So I'm not saying they're going to run a ton of 12, but if they did, I feel like that's a sweet spot. So again, I'm not anti-Rice, but I just think in the 3rd round, you could maybe find one of those higher options there.
Yeah, no, and you're not wrong. And one thing, it's an interesting scheme because they ran like some of the most 11 personnel in the league. 12 personnel, they were middle of the pack, but 13, they were back up near the top of the league. They love to create those mismatches. They use their like 6-0 line packages. It's actually hilarious. I looked at the stats. When they use 6 offensive linemen, they never straight drop back pass, which I'm like, yes, if you're going to have an extra lineman, why would you ever not use play action? Just run and then force them to respect that and then play off of that. So those bigger bodies, I agree. You need the 3 receivers, but you also do need your big guys. And then I guess we can kind of close this out with, I think this is a pretty good place to kind of cut it off. So Johnny Wilson is an interesting guy, kind of more tight end size, where he's kind of like almost Keon Coleman light, where he's that massive guy who's not very explosive, but he does give you that crazy catch radius. I feel like he's just a good football player, where especially like the Senior Bowl, guys were trying to get their hands on him. That wasn't working. So they tried to give him space and then hit him at the top of the route. That wasn't working either. So I do think he's a better football player than he gets credit for. Luke McCaffrey is a guy where you see a lot of flashes, at least from like what I've noticed. Don't know a ton about him, though. Obviously, like from Rice, lower level of competition. Javon Baker, if he is there in the 3rd round, then like, yes, I'm taking him immediately. I love his skill set. He reminds me also kind of like an Xavier Leggett, maybe again, like an Xavier Leggett light, where he's big, he's physical. He just is a football player. He knows how to get open, and he has great hands, can really go outside of his catch or go outside of his frame and make some tough grabs. And then Malik Washington, undersized guy who did really well at the Shrine Bowl. I would probably consider him more in like the 4th or 5th round range because he's so small and that skill set's a little repetitive. And then Jamari Thrash and Jacob Cowing, other guys who I think they're great football players, electric, but also undersized. What do you think of this group?
Yeah, it's funny. Johnny Wilson, he's 6'7", right? He's this massive guy, and that jumps out at you. You watch him like, holy smokes, this guy is huge. Only thing that worries, and I know it's not an apples to apples and a fully fair comparison, but it's like Darnell Washington coming out of Georgia at tight end. He goes to the Steelers. He's this massive guy, and he's been okay, but he hasn't had the breakout impact I think a lot of people thought he would, even in the red zone. He hasn't, and that's what I worry. Like, I worry about Johnny Wilson, just people falling in love with the side. Like, I don't like he's a pretty good prospect, but he's not like, to me, he's a firm day 3 guy for me there. And McCaffrey, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that much about.
You're not watching Rice every weekend? What the heck?
No, I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not watching. I know who his dad is. I'll tell you that. No, but I think McCaffrey is like, again, that's like that day 3 solid. Like, to me, that's like, we're looking at this list. McMillan's a guy I think could legitimately play. The rest of these guys, I'm like, they're going to start out as depth pieces. And you mentioned Baker, you like him. Like, could that guy pop, and not to use the Demario Douglas nickname, but could he pop and be really good and all of a sudden get on the field? Like, that's because I feel like even last year when they drafted Demario Douglas, there was a segment of people that were like, oh, this guy's really good. And like, he was, not at a premier school and people know this guy's going to play. And then he ended up doing that. I don't know. Like, I don't see McCaffrey or like Malik Washington. Like, I don't know if I see them being guys quite like, they're more developmental guys to me.
I agree. Okay. I've already had you for almost an hour.
It's been a pleasure. Don't worry.
I mean, you did bring up tight ends. So do you got some time? You want to maybe pull them up? And
you know what? I love talking tight ends. You pull them up. I'm all.
All right. Let's go. All right. I'm excited. Oh, no.
I'll tell you now, though, I don't think they should take Brock Bowers at 3rd overall. So I'll preface it. Spoiler alert.
We're just gonna. I'm not even gonna tease you guys. We're just gonna take Brock. I love him. If they had a quarterback, I would say yes. Get Brock Bowers because he can be. He's not Gronk, obviously, but he can have that Gronk type presence where you can line him up everywhere. He's a mismatch, and he can be the focal point where everybody thinks, oh, it's got to be a wide receiver. A good tight end can be the focal point of your offense, like a Sam Laporta type. Although they have so many weapons, he doesn't have to be. But okay, so we talked about Jatavian Sanders. He's the only guy who's probably going to go in the early rounds of the draft. These other guys are probably more like 4th to 6th, 7th-ish round prospects. But you want to add anything to Jatavian Sanders we haven't mentioned already?
No. So I don't know if and I know we talked about this a little bit. I don't know if I'd quite go 34 overall with him, but like, I'd be open to if they traded down in the 2nd round and he's there, because this dude, he's huge. He's like 6'4", 243, 44 pounds, can block well, but he moves really well for that size. And it's just something that, like, they had it a little bit in Farrell Brown this past year, but like, imagine if Farrell Brown was like another level above what he was. Like, that to me is what Jatavian Sanders can be. And that's a really valuable piece to have. So not at 34 overall, but at like 48 overall, you're something you trade down, then I'd be open to that.
Yeah, he's kind of like that Travis Kelce type where you can use him more as like a big slot receiver, because I know, like, at least, from what I've seen, it's mostly his receiving stuff. And that's very impressive. Like, he's fast. He's going to be a mismatch. There's not going to be a lot of safeties that can cover him. No linebacker is going to be able to cover him. So he's one of those guys where defenses are going to say, are we going to put one of our corners on him? Like, just so we can get that athleticism matchup. So I really like him. If they want to double dip, he also is one of those guys where, like, all right, you get your more like move tight end early on. You got Hunter Henry, and then you go later in the rounds and you get more your blocking tight end. So I'm not going to lie, past like Jaheim Bell, I'm not super familiar with these guys, but I know Theo Johnson tested like crazy. Ben Sinnott, I think it's Sinnott. Is that it?
You know what? I'm not as familiar. Like, not quite as familiar with him, to be honest with you.
I know him from the Senior Bowl, and from there, I was impressed. He's kind of like a Harrison Bryant type where you can move him around. He's a fullback, have him on the wing. He's a really good blocker for you, and I think he was one of those guys who's underutilized as a receiver. He's got good hands. He can be useful in the red zone. He showed some pretty good mobility. They had him run, I think it was like he ran a slant, and then he ran a whip, and I was like, that looks good. If you isolate him one-on-one, I think he'd give somebody some trouble. So then you got Jaheim Bell. He's another kind of in that similar mold, wing, fullback type with really good athleticism. So, and then honestly, the rest of these guys I'm not super familiar with, but fire off. Oh, and then Cade Stover, obviously.
Yeah, so Cade Stover's one. Like, I look at him. It's funny. Him and Theo Johnson, I feel like they're so close. Like, so close. They do a lot of things. Like, I think they would be the ideal guys that you bring in and they develop behind Hunter Henry, behind Austin Hooper, and then in a year, Austin Hooper leaves and your 12 personnel is Hunter Henry and one of those guys. Like, I think that's, and you could maybe get him on the field here and there, certain packages, 13 personnel, or just if Hunter Henry needs a blow and you want to put Theo Johnson out there. But I look at those guys as kind of the ideal developmental guys in this whole, and I think you can have them in the 4th or 5th round, especially Theo Johnson. Like, they could be the 4th or 5th. If you walk away from round 5 and you got Theo Johnson, like, I'm feeling pretty good. You walk away even from round 4 with one of those guys, like, I feel pretty good. Because again, like, a young like, you take a quarterback at 3, a young quarterback's best friend is a good O-line and good tight ends. So if you improve the offensive line from here to the draft and maybe address it in round 2 as well, and then you have Hunter Henry and you have another young tight end that can almost develop along with that quarterback, you'd be on to something.
I agree. Is there anybody else on this list? I know everybody likes Tip Ryman, however you pronounce it. I'm not very familiar with him personally, but I know that he's been a fan favorite.
Yeah, nobody else really on. I mean, the kid from Arizona, I've watched a little bit, but nothing to make a real assessment. So yeah, nobody. And that's the thing. It's a really good offensive tackle and receiver draft. Pretty thin tight end. Like, Brock Bowers is a headliner, but beyond him, pretty thin tight end draft.
And then after Tavian Sanders, it's like him and like Brock are like this. And then after Sanders, it's like,
yeah, I agree completely.
The only other guy on this list that I've watched is AJ Barner. I was watching JJ McCarthy. I think it was against Michigan State, I want to say. I might be wrong on that. But it was one of the few games that Barner actually got to show what he could do as a receiver. He's good in the scramble drill, soft hands. You can tell he's a good mover, where it's like, all right, they use him as a blocker. And I think he's one of the best blocking tight ends in this entire class, which, again, he's a guy you get like the 6th round, maybe, because he's mostly been a blocker and you don't really know what you're going to get as a receiver. But if you get him and Cade Stover, I think that's a recipe where you're saying, okay, these are 2 guys where I can develop in like a year or 2. These can be my 2 dual threat tight ends where, maybe AJ Barner doesn't terrify you as a receiver, but Cade Stover can create enough of a mismatch that I think Barner's somebody who could play off that. So, I mean, honestly, the more I'm thinking about it, I think they could probably, if they like Javon Foster in the 5th, you could double dip at tight end and wide receiver, and this offense looks a lot different, more explosive. And then you get that young talent where it's like, all right, we have our older guys who are safety blankets. Now we get our juice with these young guys. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea. And like, I look at the draft too, just like as a bigger picture thing. Like, they're going to walk away maybe drafting a couple defensive players, and like, that's it. So like, that's why to me later, and I even wonder later in the draft, like, if you're sitting there in round 6 and like Joe Milton's there or Jordan Travis is there, like, I really seriously consider that. And as much as I would love Drake May at 3 or Jaden Daniels at 3, like Jordan Travis outplayed Jaden Daniels on Labor Day weekend and was going to potentially win the Heisman, and they were going to make the playoff until he got hurt. Like, if that guy's sitting there in round 5 and you can, let him heal from his injury, or round 6, let him heal from his injury, develop. At worst, you have a good backup for a few years, and who knows, maybe he's really good. And Joe Milton, I put Joe Milton a little bit below that. I don't think he's quite Jordan Travis, but a guy you can develop, maybe be your long-term backup. Because the thing is, Jacoby Brissett's going to be here for a year. Bailey Zappi's going to be here another year, 2 max, and then he might want to go somewhere else. So you are going to have to start to replenish that. And like, I wouldn't necessarily go in saying I'm going to take 2 quarterbacks, but those are 2 guys. Like, if I'm late on day 3 and they're there, I think I make a move for one of them.
I was thinking about that because the idea of double dipping at quarterback is, I think, financially prudent. It makes a lot of sense, especially 2 young, talented guys like a Jordan Travis. Somebody could get a home run, grabbing him in like the 5th round or sometime on day 3. So I like that option. And then you think, okay, but like, is it going to be, RG3 and Kirk Cousins? That was one of the best case scenarios where they still have a mutual respect for each other and they try to make each other better. And it's not a Mack and Bailey situation where they're, kind of bashing heads and working against each other and in their own little silos. But then it's like you bring in an Alex Van Pelt because he's that glue guy. Like, he's so well respected for being able to really placate things and make sure that everybody's on the same page and boost morale, rather. And then Jacoby Brissett. Like, you are not going to have toxicity in a quarterback room with Jacoby Brissett. It's just not going to happen. So that is an interesting option. If you want to maybe just make sure you hedge your bet, or again, get a really talented quarterback who may not play for you, but who can get healthy and develop behind the scenes, then you start seeing what he can do in preseason games, see if maybe you get him in a trade. If something works out with your 1st round pick, I think that's a good way to go. John, This has been a blast. I already kept you longer than I probably should have, but I wanted to hear what you had to say about these tight ends. Before I let you go, please let the people know where they can find you and what excellent stuff you got coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Taylor. It's always a pleasure talking football with you. I do it anytime. You can find me on Twitter at @therealJonLyons. You can find me on WEEI pretty much every weekend. I usually tweet out when I'm on, but essentially every weekend there. I also do a lot of work with the New England Football Journal as well. John Serenides and Kevin Stone, they do a terrific job over there. I do a lot of Patriots work with them and overall football work with them. And of course, you can catch my podcast every couple weeks or so on the Believe Network. So I'm in a few different places. But like I said, Taylor, it is always a pleasure coming on with you. And you can hit me up anytime. I'm always happy to come on.
I'm going to take you up on that. Thank you so much, buddy. You're a busy guy. Seriously, check him out. Does fantastic work. You all watch him. You all know he's smart. And then you can get as much of it as you want by going all those places and checking him out. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate you so much. Please be safe tonight. All right. I know the Calvin Ridley news was tough. We will get through this. It's very early in the offseason. All right, now, everybody.